In today's episode, we're learning about the 5 elements that make a great customer experience. From Engagement, I'm David Millay, and this is Flip the Switch. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Flip the Switch, where we sit down with leaders in customer experience and employee experience, and we try to figure out what are the trends that they're paying attention to, what are the experiments that they're running, what are the principles that have helped guide them to success throughout their career. Then we take all those insights and we apply them to the world of sports and entertainment. Now, today's episode is really exciting for me specifically, as I am a big fan of Chick-fil-A, and we have Elizabeth Dixon on the show. And Elizabeth has a really unique role at Chick-fil-A. Her role is the principal lead of strategy, hospitality, and service design. Now, with that being said, we actually don't talk a ton about Chick-fil-A in this episode because this episode is really about Elizabeth Dixon and all that she does as her role as a really professional speaker and book writer in the world of customer experience. So while, again, she's got that Chick-fil-A background and deep expertise, we try not to go too much into Chick-fil-A because we don't want to unpack too much of the secret sauce, not to be confused with Chick-fil-A sauce, which I put on basically everything and always have a tub of in my fridge at all times. But let's talk about Elizabeth a little bit. So she wrote a great book called The Power of Customer Experience, 5 Elements to Make an Impact. And so in this episode with Elizabeth, we are really going to dive into what are those 5 key elements that really make up a great customer experience. We're going to go down all kinds of rabbit holes. You'll see right away with Elizabeth, Katie on our team, Katie Rudy, if you don't know her, she always prepares these like brilliant guest guides. And every time we have a guest come on, they comment on them. But inevitably on this one, you'll see right away, we start straying from that guest guide, not because it wasn't a great guest guide, but because Elizabeth and I could go in 100 different directions on the topics of customer experience. So you will see that we just explore a bunch of different nooks and crannies. But again, it's structured around her thoughts around the 5 elements that make a great customer experience. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Elizabeth Dixon. All right, Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I would be remiss if we did not start off by sharing that I am a signature member at Chick-fil-A, and I am there way more than my doctor would like. But you know what? It's for my heart. It does my soul good and it does my belly good. So I just want to thank you on behalf of all of my lunch meals that constantly are eaten.
I love it. And just so you know, we have a great breakfast and dinner. So you can go a few times a day. We welcome that.
Good point. So I normally do like intermittent fasting where I don't eat between like 12. I only eat between 12 and 8. The only time I will break that is if somebody's like, "Hey, I'm making a run for chicken minis at Chick-fil-A," and I'll be like, "All right, I'll break my fast for that."
I love it.
Well, let's jump into it. So you have got one of the coolest roles, and we've really been looking forward to this episode for a long time. So talk to us about your role at Chick-fil-A, what you do there, and again, principal lead of strategy, hospitality, service design, all things that we love here at Engagement and on Flip the Switch. So let's unpack what you do at Chick-fil-A a little bit before we go into the rest of the show.
Awesome. So strategy, the way we think about it is how to win in a certain space. So it's really creating the plan to meet established goals. So as a team, we work in this service and hospitality space. So think about the ordering process, the meal assembly process, the way your meal is delivered to you, whether that's through the drive-through or curbside, delivery, inside the restaurant, carry out, etc. So how do we really win in that space moving into the future, really digging into what our customers are telling us that they need and they want, and how can we provide that in the best possible way? And then research and development is thinking, okay, in the next 3 to 10 years, what are some of the innovations that we're going to need to at least have a point of view on, if not have a clear plan for how we would be able to implement into restaurants to improve the overall guest experience. So it is definitely a lot of fun, and we get to learn a lot every day.
God, I have so many more questions just off that, but I know that today is the Elizabeth Dixon show, not the Chick-fil-A show. So we'll go from there. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the frameworks that you use when you're approaching really great customer experiences. So, from everything that I've heard from you before, you've really got kind of five core elements to great customer experiences that you use on a regular basis. So, talk us through what those five great customer experience elements are.
For sure. So the first one is about choosing your mindset. It's really foundational. We have to make sure that we're assessing what our mindset is around customers, around employees, around our job, around our boss. Like, what is our mindset? Is it I have to do this or I get to do this? Is it, the customer is a nuisance and a bother, or they're a necessity and they hold a really important place within the organization? So choosing our mindset. The second is creating the culture around us. The third is knowing our customers and who they are and what they want and what they value and what role we play in their lives. And then the fourth is to define your differentiator. What sets you apart? What sets you apart as an individual? What sets you apart as a team? And ultimately, what sets you apart as an organization towards your customers? And then finally, kind of the pinnacle per se would be pursuing innovation. And
Mhm.
all five of these elements are things that we constantly have to consider, constantly have to work on. They're not really one and done, check the box and move on, but they're things that we need to evaluate, improve on, and continually be thinking about.
These are awesome. I'm really excited to dig into like how you came up with these. And I've got to think that your time at Chick-fil-A has inspired that a little bit. But I guess before we go into how we came up with these and like get digging into them, talk to us a little bit about how you rose to your role in Chick-fil-A and kind of a little bit more on your background before we dive deep into these five core elements.
For sure. So I started almost 20 years ago at Chick-fil-A. My first role was to create a wellness program for the company. So health and wellness was more emerging in the corporate space at the time. Within Atlanta, we had a few of the major companies like a Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Delta, Chick-fil-A, that we're really thinking about how do we best take care of our people so that they can be able to fully live life and do their work well, and all of these different benefits of taking care of your wellness. And then after that, after we really got that established, I spent a few years in human resources, building a few more employee related programs. And then I made a shift over to marketing. And the last 10 years I've been in marketing. I led hospitality for a few years. And then we merged hospitality and service design together.
Mm.
And I focused on strategy and research and development for the past 4 years, which has been, again, really life giving and a fun journey.
How did you guys separate? I guess can maybe talk a little bit about this if you can. The difference between kind of hospitality, service design, and marketing, and how those kind of all fit together. Because I think sometimes for us, like one of the common things that we get with a sports team is somebody's like, we're looking for a head of customer experience, and then like I find out more about the role because I'm trying to help them promote it, and I'm like, no, that's the head of your call center. Like that's very different than your head of customer experience. So I think just maybe giving us a little bit of insight into how y'all differentiate service design from hospitality from marketing and how that kind of breaks up.
Yes, absolutely. So to your example of the call center would be one of the touch points and components within the overall customer experience. And so marketing broadly is going to be how we are communicating with customers. It's going to have so many different aspects to it. One of them is customer experience. And that is the experiences that customers are having with the brand. And so service design ultimately is the process that's being designed that the customer goes through. So at Chick-fil-A, it's going to be the pulling onto the lot, it's placing the order, it's payment, it's meal delivery, all those steps. And then everything behind the scenes that the employee has to do to prepare the food, to assemble it together, to deliver it accurately to the right customer. Hospitality is more of how you're treated in the process. So service is providing the product, hospitality is how people are treated. And you have to have both because I think we've all been there where there's been a great service, but poor hospitality. Like it was accurate. It was, if it was food, it was hot. It was timely, but the person could care less about you. And we've also had the opposite
Hmm.
be true in any industry where it's like the if it was at a stadium, it's like the tickets were maybe they weren't scanning in properly, or
Yep.
somehow there was a mix up with seats or something. But my goodness, like that sweet person, like she was so wonderful. And so we have to have both where the process is accurate, it's timely, it's getting customers what they want, and the way that we're treating them in the process,
Mm.
whether it's from a human or a digital perspective, is one that they feel cared for and valued and appreciated.
I love that differentiation. And like, I mean, to me, the image that I always think about, especially difference between hospitality and service design, I really like those two words specifically. That those are not words that I normally use when I think about it, but maybe
Yeah,
I might borrow those.
go for it.
But normally, like the image that comes to my mind is, you know, the guy holding up the sign, and he's got a big smile, or he's got a big sign behind him. He's got a big smile on his face, but the sign says absolutely no refunds whatsoever, right? And you're
Yes,
like,
yes.
the person can be the nicest person in the world from a hospitality standpoint. They could be delivering on that, but the service design, the process behind the scenes is not structured in a way. And that's where, like, I think we oftentimes in the sports space, like people want to quickly solve things with hospitality. And they're like, let's throw training at
Mm.
it. Let's teach our people to be nicer. And you're like, we can do that. But if the services and the structures aren't supported behind it to reinforce that, you can't have one and not the other. So I love that
And even
differentiation.
more to your point there, yeah, even building on what you're saying, if the processes are hindering the employees and they're really hospitable, great employees, they're going to get so frustrated because they're going to be like, oh, this is so annoying. Why do I keep having to be the face of a broken system? And so it has to be both. The system has to be supportive and ultimately kind of elevate the employee to just be the cherry on top and create that exceptional experience.
Okay, question here for you, because you've done a lot of work with big companies outside of Chick-fil-A as well, just as Elizabeth Dixon. So if you had to start with one of the two, right? Let's say both of them are broken. Which one would you start with?
Mm, mm, golly, that's so hard. It's
I,
like choosing between children.
I mean,
Which child do you love
I think
more?
it's kind of like organizationally, like it depends, and I'm bailing you out on this question here, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'm just curious, like off the top of your head.
So I feel like it's a little unfair for me to say a little bit of both, but it's kind of like when you're at that ice cream shop and they're like all the flavors, and you're like, can I kind of do two
Yeah.
scoops and get a little bit of both? But I think it is a little bit of both in the sense that we have to evaluate where are the processes broken, and where they're super, super broken, we need to jump in and quickly fix
Yeah.
those things. When we're getting inaccurate information to customers, when they're not able to get to their seats in time for the game to start, when they can't, they don't have enough time to get food and get back, and the things about the experience that are so critically important, when they are blatantly broken, we have to jump in and fix those as quickly as possible. The hospitality side, I think that's something that we're constantly hitting the flywheel about. And it's a lot about how the people that we're selecting and how they're naturally wired and their mindsets. So I think you can focus on both by saying, okay, where are the processes most broken? Let's jump in and fix those. And how are we selecting people that are bringing our brand to life in a way that we are really proud of? And so in organizations large enough, you're able to assign those projects to two different people potentially.
Yeah.
So I know it's not really fair to say, but I would say like a little bit of both goes a long way.
So many interesting things that are not like what we plan to talk about, but uh, I think splitting it up, honestly, and dividing it into two people to me is great. Splitting it
100%.
is a really good insight by you. Um,
And I think it's important that um, we evaluate both distinctively and then brought together. So, like you're saying, you're brought in to work on both of these things, and then they ultimately have to merge together to make a cohesive experience. Because if you have really great, hospitable people who don't understand the process, that's a breakdown too. So I think looking at
yeah.
them uniquely, designing for them intentionally, and then blending them together where it is all cohesive, because customers don't see it distinctively. We can design for it, think about them, assess them distinctively, but the customer sees it in the totality of their experience. And wherever they hit friction,
Yeah.
They don't like it. And
Exactly.
so the more that we can remove that and make it super cohesive. And again, then also digitally. So the digital component and the human component, all of that needs to be seamless.
I love it. Well, let's jump back into
No
your
pressure.
yeah, I know. It's a lot of work, no doubt. But I think your 5 elements to a great customer experience can really help start to frame up how to tackle some of this work that can be overwhelming. So let's jump back into that. I mean, it starts with choosing your mindset. So talk to us a little bit about choose your mindset, and kind of your premise there, and then I've got some follow-up questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, choosing your mindset truly is about making sure that the thoughts that we're having, the stories that we're telling ourselves, that framework for how we're even viewing the world is aligned with ultimately the experiences that we want to create for people around us. So, one thing that I say in the book and in some videos is about like your mindset determines what you get. And if your mindset, like go back way down to childhood, if your mindset is like, I'm never gonna get it. I'm never gonna be able to do it. An example from our life, we took our kids snow skiing this past winter, and my 8-year-old was so determined to do this little jump, but he kept crashing on it. And it was later in the day, and we were riding up the lift together, and he just said, "Mom, I'm never gonna be able to do it." And I said, "You're exactly right if that's what you're telling yourself. If that's your mindset, like, that is what you're gonna get." And I said, "What if you told yourself," and for a moment thought about accomplishing it and doing it. I said, "Let's talk about that and let's think about that." And so we did for a little bit on this lift up and talked about what it's gonna feel like to do it. What is it gonna look like for you to hit that jump and to land it? And it worked out super well because the next time he tried it, he landed it. Like, it would have been a total bummer if he didn't. And the smile on his face, like I was totally that mom with frigid fingers pulling out my phone to take a picture of the smile on his face after he landed it. But the same is true in snow skiing. It's true in every aspect of the customer experience. If we're thinking about our customers as, oh, they're such a nuisance. Like I used to work for the Gap in International Drive, Orlando, where all of the tourists come and they all come. And for whatever reason on vacation, they're like, let's try on all of the clothes. It was so easy to get so frustrated every time you'd hear that big old bus pull up and hit their air brakes and like, and they're just going to let out another 52 people to try on these iconic Gap sweatshirts, and we're going to have to put them back in the perfect fold. It was super easy to get really frustrated, really easy. But we had a manager that would always remind us, like, no, we get to be a special part of their vacation. We get to be a special moment on their journey. That mindset between a nuisance of that customer or a necessity is critical because then that impacts the thoughts that we have, the actions we have, and ultimately the behaviors that we create.
Uh, I love that insight, and because I think that happens a lot for us with sports teams where we look at
Mhm.
them oftentimes as a fan as they're complaining about this or they're making a big deal about lines or it's the same concession prices we've always had, but they keep complaining about it and it's just more work for us to do, as opposed to the mindset of like, hey, at the end of the day, fans pay for everything, right? Like, and there've been some really interesting moves by some sports teams. We had a guy by the name of Sean McIntosh on the podcast who is like the chief fan officer for Charlotte's
Yes.
new MLS team, and his whole goal, and he reports directly to the president. His whole goal is to like
Mhm.
be the voice of the fan at C-suite meetings, so that people can make sure, hey,
Love it.
we're keeping the fan as a positive, and we're not going to talk bad about the fans because the voice of the fan is sitting in the room with us, right? So I think that's a great
100%.
outlook on it. I think one other thing, like something that you hit on that I hadn't thought about, is as you were telling the story about your 8-year-old. I think sometimes internally when we're in bigger organizations, when we get blocked or shut down by red tape and bureaucracy, we tend to
Mm.
create this narrative in our head of like, well, that'll never get approved or that'll never happen. And I think that's a really dangerous mindset to get into because if you continue to tell yourself that, you're going to continue to get blocked. And sometimes it takes a fresh face coming in and just like beating down the door to get some of these things that really are great for the organization, but just are new to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it can be exhausting and tiring, but that mindset makes such a powerful difference into how we're going to choose to show up and push forward and throw down those doors and those walls. And I think if we believe in the idea enough, it will give us enough gumption to keep moving forward. And personally, I found the more pain that we can allow others to experience or see, the quicker ideas can move through. If we have an
Interesting.
idea and there's no really real pain that it's going to solve, a lot of times it's like, oh, it sounds nice, but no. But when we can really let others, leaders in our organization, see the pain that's being created and experience it. So imagine in a stadium, if there's like an hour-long line at a particular spot, maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's souvenirs, something. And maybe they haven't experienced that. Hey, next Saturday night at the game, I want you to come with me. And we're going to stand in this line. And by minute 13, they're probably going to be like watching customers walk out of the line. And they're going to be so frustrated. We have to do something about this. And you're like, well, fantastic. Like, I'd love to help. I have an idea for how we could do this. So I think the more that we can help the pain be obvious and understood, and we can communicate that pain to others, our leaders don't want to, I mean, they're not sitting around saying, like, you know what we want to do today? We want to block as many good ideas as possible, and we want to frustrate our team as much as possible. No, but they're busy and they're thinking about so many different aspects. If we can help make that pain real and then offer a solution, here's how we can solve it. It's just like, it just kind of greases the slide and helps it move down a whole lot faster than it could have otherwise.
That's a great way of looking at it. I think too often good ideas get proposed as value adds as opposed to pain solvers. And I think you're
Right.
right. If you present it more as a pain solver, unfortunately, like, but that is tends to what get pushed through a little bit better than just like, hey,
Yep.
this is a value add, because a value add means more work. A pain solver means I'm going to get somebody off my back. Um,
Yes, totally, and make the experience better.
Yeah. So on one more thing on choose your mindset, I mean, where do organizations you feel like find themselves getting the most frustrated from their customers? And like how often are those frustrations self-inflicted?
It's a great question. I think the most frustrating point for organizations is recovery situations, and it's within broken processes. So I think a lot of times they're very self-inflicted because it is identifying a process that's broken. And I think it's easy to look at that. You mentioned this already, like, oh, they're complaining about this again. Oh, that's just helping you diagnose the problem. I mean, that's like that knee pain flaring up to tell you something's wrong. You need to head to the doctor. Like wherever you're getting thematic feedback of frustration or positives from customers, that's where it needs your attention. There's a problem that needs to be solved there. And I think within the recovery situations, that's where things get the most frustrating because that's where people get most emotional, get most frustrated because something is really aggravating them. And a lot of times when a customer is disgruntled, like it has hit them really, really, really deep. Um, I think that being able to have that mindset that those recovery situations are an opportunity. They're not an obstacle, they're not a nuisance, but they're actually an opportunity to build loyalty
Mm.
is powerful. And the Ritz-Carlton, Hort Schulze, who founded the Ritz-Carlton, he was really passionate about this in his days at the Ritz, that a guest recovery moment is an opportunity to build loyalty. And actually, what he found is that when they recovered the guest well, when they recovered the situation well, it built loyalty that could have never been established if a problem never happened.
Which is
And I
wild.
think when we view it like that and we're like, "Oh, like ding, 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 ding," like got a really fired up customer, if I can solve it for them, apologize, "I'm so sorry that inconvenience happened. Let me personally take care of this for you and make sure that we make this right." And go above and beyond in some way. For organizations, we have to make sure that we're equipping the front lines to be able to not only solve it, but go above and beyond for it. And then ultimately, what happens is that customer is more loyal and they feel more connection to that brand. I had something happen the other day. I purchased something online. This is super embarrassing to say, but I purchased it online and there were a bunch of oxes And I was super frustrated because one of the important pieces didn't come. And I called and I was like, guys, like you got 12 of the pieces, but not 13. Oh, Miss Dixon, we're so sorry. We're going to have that sent out right away. Like a week later, I'm cleaning up the space. Yeah,
You found it.
I totally owe. Yeah. I was
I'm
like,
glad.
oh, and then I have to go through the whole rigmarole of like, I'm like, I need to get this piece back to them because they went above and beyond to get it to me. But I can't fully quantify the trust that I have with that brand because they didn't question
Mm.
me. They didn't force me to prove something. That $30 piece, they were like, we are so sorry, Miss Dixon. We're going to get that right to you. And I've bought 3 more things from them since
There you
then
go.
because I'm like, I trust them. I believe in that. So equipping that front line for the recovery situation to see it as an opportunity and not what our natural bodies want to do, which is fight or flight. The natural instinct is like get defensive, defend our brand, defend our company, or just run away and try to ignore the problem. But instead to set those aside and go, whoa, this is actually an opportunity for loyalty. Let me see if I can step into this and be able to help get this guest to where they need to be. And then ultimately it helps the loyalty grow more.
Recovery being a really big frustration point on the choosing your mindset for organizations makes a ton of sense. I do have a question. You can say I can't dig into this or not. At Disney, right? We had our service recovery processes where we had, little kid drops an ice cream cone. We had a little form that you could fill out and you would track it and it would go internally and you could give out so much of those per day and it all gets logged. Ritz-Carlton, right? Famous for theirs, where I think now is like it's like unlimited, right? Is that? I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Is unlimited for service recovery? Like you could do whatever.
I think it's been, and I think it still is $2,000 per day per guest, which is pretty much as
Pretty much
unlimited as it
unlimited.
gets. So I'm like, and what's so great is Horace tells the story. So he mentored me 4 years ago, and he is German. He's amazing. He's passionate. And I asked him one day, I said, what is the most money that was spent? Because I'm thinking it was going to be
Yeah.
$2,005 or something that just like tipped the line. And he said, in his amazing German accent, and he was like, "No, like they didn't even come close. $800 was the most that was ever spent." I said, What'd they spend it on?"
Interesting.
And this couple was on their honeymoon at one of the Ritz properties, and the husband lost his wedding band in the sand. And they were devastated at dinner, and the waitress inquired, like, "Is everything okay?" And they explained, "We were out on the beach, and he lost his wedding ring," and they were torn apart about it. So that waitress went and with a few other fellow employees, went and purchased a few additional metal detectors to add to the ones that they had, and they went out and scoured the beach that night, found his wedding band, and presented it to them at breakfast the next morning.
Oh my gosh, talk about brand loyalty after
I'm like, "You're gonna, like, eat rice and beans the rest of your life so you can afford to go to
that.
the Ritz as often as possible." I mean, that's at least what I would do. But what Horst said is it's not about specifically that $2,000. It's giving a ceiling that's high enough that everybody knows you're serious and they know that they have freedom to do what's going to be generous and do what's going to be right in that moment. And the way he arrived at that $2,000 was related to the lifetime value of the guest. And so he knew the average age, he knew how long they were going to be traveling, and he wanted them to travel and stay with him for the rest of their time. And so to buy a flower arrangement for a guest that was in town for a funeral, to send up champagne and strawberries for a celebratory moment, or to buy some metal detectors to go and find a ring out on the beach, all of those little things create that connection and relationship, and ultimately they make the trust and that loyalty grow better. But we have to make the ceiling high enough, to your point. So you're not like you get one ice cream cone to give out per day. And then you're like, oh no, like they were twins and they both dropped their cones. Like, what do you do now? You got to make it high enough so that employees know that they can truly make a difference.
All right, let's talk about create your culture. So we've got choose your mindset as the first element. Let's talk about creating your culture as the second element. Talk to us a little bit about how you view corporations and organizational culture and creating that. And then I've got a ton of follow-up questions there.
Okay, awesome. So, culture, one of my favorite definitions is I've heard it said before, culture is like, it's just how we do it here. It's some of those spoken and unspoken kind of rules within a culture of this is how we operate. Like in our family, we have a culture. We don't have phones at the dinner table. So if you're a guest and you come and you have your phone, my kids are going to look at you like, what are you doing? That's not how we do it here. We don't do that. So it's those little things that ultimately become really important. I was on an elevator in our office one time, and one of the things within our culture is you talk to people on the elevator. You go to downtown Atlanta, people don't necessarily talk to each other, but you sure do at our office. And someone hopped on talking on the phone, and everyone was like, because that's not how we do it here. It's those little spoken and sometimes unspoken things. And we have to know what those important elements are. And we have to recognize that the way we behave, even if we're in a massive company, the way we behave creates a culture around us. And we have an opportunity to positively or negatively impact the culture by how we choose to show up.
So you have a quote here that says, "We get what we model, create, and allow." So then my next follow up to that is going to be like, all right, things like being in an elevator and talking to each other. What are some more attributes or characteristics of organizations that have a cohesive culture that they most often exhibit that you've seen from working with organizations around the world?
So I think, the actual behaviors can be so nuanced and unique and tribal per se, where they just become a part of that culture. But I think consistency, when we think about cohesive cultures, there is broadly a consistency and an alignment that's there. You know what to expect. You can trust and therefore you feel like you have a relationship with the company that you work for, where the opposite of more struggling organizations would be inconsistency and employees not really knowing where they stand. They always have that hesitation. And so consistency and alignment compared to inconsistency make a massive difference within a culture.
Absolutely. I mean, even so, this is, I'm going to talk Chick-fil-A for 2 seconds as a customer point of view from my end. I mean, that is one of the things I think that everybody loves about Chick-fil-A. Like, yes, the hospitality is great. Yes, the service design is great. But you know that when you go to Chick-fil-A, they're going to get your order right. Like, that doesn't matter what Chick-fil-A you are at, where it is, who's working there. Like, you know that they're going to get that right. And there's a consistency there. And if something is messed up, there's a consistency with how it gets handled as well. And so to your point, I think that is a awesome identifier of no matter who you work with in the organization, no matter who you touch, who you interact with, is there a consistent way that they handle situations? Is there a consistent way that they proactively greet you or whatever it might be? So consistency to me is huge. What are if there's an organization that is struggling with this, and like if I'm a middle manager or like a director listening to this podcast, what are some of the best ways you've seen middle managers or directors convince senior leadership to make changes?
I think it goes back to the pain that we talked about
Mm,
before,
yep.
being really clear on what is the problem? What is happening? What's the impact of that problem? What's going to happen if we don't do something about this? I think those are like the three kind of tentacles to communicating the pain of it. I think great language that I have seen used and has been really helpful to me is just asking the question, "Hey, have you noticed? Hey, have you noticed that 70% of our employees are headed out immediately at once they clock out at 5 o'clock, and only a few people really linger and hang out with each other." I mean, I'm
Yeah,
making
yeah,
this
yeah,
up.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if that's a problem or not a problem. But the point is really just like, hey, have you noticed that? And then fill in the blank. And then, my concern with it is that if we don't do something about this, what it could possibly do is X. I think employee retention is a big one actually, where it's like, have you noticed that we have a 50% turnover year over year with our stadium staff?
Yeah.
No, like I didn't realize that. Well, here's where I'm concerned. We know that our customers tell us that what they love most is Mr. Gerald who takes their tickets at the gate. And it is Miss Louisa who is, distributing popcorn in the stands. Like some of those people are so critically important. My concern is that if we lose those, we're going to lose part of what separates us and makes us unique and what our customers love about us. So, this is the pain. This is the impact that it could have if we don't do something about this. And just helping others see that pain so that then there can be action behind it to do something.
Uh, all right, Elizabeth, computer snafu, but we are in it. So let's roll on to the next one. We've got create your culture. We've got choose your mindset. Now let's jump into know your customer, your third element of great customer experiences.
Yes, know your customer. Who are they? Like, it couldn't be every fan that's showing up for an event. It's not every person that's showing up to a movie theater to buy a car or to get a chicken sandwich, whatever the industry is. But who is that really? Like, who is the target customer you're serving? And where that really helps is because when you're having to make trade offs and make different decisions for what menu item you're going to take away, or what service process you're going to add, or what element you're going to consider taking away, is this serving our target customer or is it not? And so it's really important to know who are they that you're really focusing to serve? What do they value? What do they need? And what is that role that you play in their life? And the more crystal clear we are on that, the more precise we can be in the experiences that we're creating for them.
I love it. So, one of the things that's interesting to me about bigger organizations that have a lot of service offerings, I think you can do all your like fan personas, right? Or like what are our goals, motivations of our people? And it's almost easier to start, I think, that way. What are the goals, motivations, interests of our target audience that we're trying to reach, and then build services and products from there. But when I think about things like hospitality and service design, how do you differentiate whether someone's coming for those things or they're coming for the product, right? Again, Chick-fil-A, key example of that, of like you have a great product, but you also have great hospitality and service design. And there's a lot of organizations that do that as well. But how do you kind of differentiate between whether they're there for the product or they're there for some of the intangible things?
I often think that customers ultimately are coming, whether it's to come to us to a game, to get a chicken sandwich, to get your oil changed, to get a manicure, like whatever it is. I think they're coming for that product or service that's meeting a very specific need. Like they need oil in their car, they need their nails done for a big event, whatever it is. But what brings them back is gonna be that experience. That's what's gonna build that relationship with them. The way that they were treated in the process, the way that they felt in that process, the seamlessness of it. Was it quick? Did it was it effective? Did they do the job correctly? Like all of that. I think the experience overall is going to bring them back. And customers want both. Like they want the product, they want that service that they're getting, and they want the experience surrounding it that ultimately makes their life easier or better in some way. So they want both. It's just what within that is really important to that target customer. What about the experience is critically important? And the more that we understand that, the touch points that are most
Mm.
important, what things can we outsource to be taken care of digitally versus being taken care of with human interaction? Understanding who that customer is helps us make those trade-offs and decisions.
When you think about some of the mistakes that organizations make around knowing your customer, where do you feel like organizations tend to trip up or get distracted when it comes to knowing your customer? Because I think there are some activities that are really great for getting to know your customer, and then there are some that are more like a fool's errand, if you will. Like you'll keep busy doing that, but it's not necessarily the right way to go about knowing your customer. What are some of the mistakes you see
Mm,
organizations make?
that's really good. I feel like I think anything that would in some way be obligatory or smoke and mirrors, just kind of like, oh yeah, we asked customers and this is what they said, like in order to move something along. But I think the great organizations out there, they truly are interested, they truly care, and they're hosting focus groups that are really precise to their target customer, to it is that they're wanting to serve. And they're listening deeply from an ethnographic perspective of, okay, this is what they're saying and what they're doing, and therefore how we can serve them best, and really understanding what's going on inside their minds I think the great brands out there are really listening and really trying to dig hard into that and getting that feedback. But I think a really critical part of that is to make sure that the people that we're listening to do represent that target audience that we're serving. And they're not just warm bodies with opinions, because that can send us on wild goose chases where it's like everything's important. Well, if everything's important, nothing's important. So there has to be some ability to say, we're going to say no to this so we can say yes to this.
I love it. Well, let's move into number 4 here. Number 4 and number 5 are really interesting, and of course, we're gonna like spend the least amount of time on these two, just from a timing perspective. Thanks, computer. But let's talk about defining your differentiator. You've worked for some organizations that have a really unique value prop when it comes to breaking a stereotype of their industry. So, how do you think about defining your differentiator for organizations that you're helping with service design and helping create great customer experiences?
Yeah, it's digging into what sets us apart, what makes us unique. And honestly, this can be applied, and all five of them can be applied at the personal level, the team level, and the organization level. So for some that are listening, they're like, oh, I'm not even on that team that works on that, or I don't think that that would be the space that I would get to really speak into. We get to have a differentiator about ourselves that we create for people around us, like how we choose to uniquely show up. And when it comes to an organizational level, it's evaluating what truly is unique about us. And I think often the things that are most unique, we take for granted. And so it's just a part of who we are that we don't necessarily talk about it as much. We might not resource it as much, like, oh yeah, we will always have that. No, 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 the things that are most unique about us, we need to resource disproportionately. We need to talk about disproportionately. We need to celebrate disproportionately, because those are the things that are adding unique value to our customers that they might not be getting anywhere else. The same is true as individuals. The things, the gifts, the wirings that set us apart uniquely. Typically, people are like, oh, well, anybody could do that. Anybody would be good at that. No, not true. You're uniquely gifted at that. You need to spend a disproportionate amount of your time using those gifts, because probably no one else on your team has that same skill set. And you need to bring that with the best that you possibly can. So, whether it's the individual, it's the team, or it's the full organization, we often downplay, we often take for granted the things that really set us apart. And we actually need to do the opposite.
So again, I'm going to hit on Chick-fil-A here. One of the great examples for me with that is like the commercials that you guys are doing right now and you have been doing for a number of years, where it's a guest sitting down with an employee and they're telling their story about why they're kind of loyal to the brand, more or less. And to me, that's a great example of, while Chick-fil-A has great food and a great product, they're highlighting their key differentiator through those commercials, which is the interactions that they have.
Mm. And I think it's like a journey for all of us to make sure like we're crystal clear on what separates us, and then the more that we can resource it and encourage it and elevate it, the better.
Well, let's talk about the last one, which is really about pursuing innovation. So, talk to us a little bit about how you guys, or how you think about helping organizations pursue innovation.
Yeah, innovation is one of those things that, especially through all the change that we've gone through, it can feel exhausting to change something else, to push forward to something else. But it's really important that we do, because we're just in a world where there are disruptors happening all around us, where companies are constantly innovating and pushing forward. And so if we don't, we'll find ourselves quickly in a place where we're not relevant anymore to meeting our customers' needs, because someone else is doing it faster, better, more effectively than we are. So pursuing innovation is critical, because it keeps us it keeps us in that place where we're scrappy, where we're not getting to a mindset where it's like we've arrived, we have it all. Um, Steve Jobs has a great quote of, "Success is a lousy teacher." It convinces people, to think that I'm messing up his quote now, but basically that they've arrived. And it is a lousy teacher in the fact that when we get to that place where things are going really well, that's probably the moment that we actually need to get more scrappy and push harder. One of the previous leaders I've had often said, we might be up by 10, but we're going to play like we're down by 20. And I think that that kind of scrappy mindset is important because the moment when you feel like you've arrived, you've got it all, it's the Sports Illustrated effect of, ooh, that's when a decline is right around the corner. So you got to keep pursuing innovation to stay scrappy and keep moving
Well, I
forward.
think you've got some great resources out there and some great questions that you've posed to help people become more pursuers of innovation. Things like, what would I do if I had half the budget and half the time to find a solution? Do you have a favorite question that people will ask internally to get better at innovation? Like, what's a question that question to me, like, that forces you to come up with some really creative ideas. Do you have any more that are for you are really stand out that organizations should utilize more on their daily practice?
I love questions so incredibly much. And there's an amazing book by Warren Berger called A More Beautiful Question. And it is a book filled with stories and questions. And so, anybody out there who loves questions or they don't, and they just need to get better at asking it, you got to get that resource because it's an incredible one. But things like, what would a 5-year-old do in this situation? Like, we have a 7 and an 8-year-old. I love going to them with problems and asking them how they would handle this because they have such a simplicity of how they think about solving something, but also such incredible creativity because they're not limited yet. They haven't been told that won't work. You can't do that. Stay inside the box. And so asking ourselves like, "Hey, what would a 5-year-old do?" And then actually going and asking a 5-year-old, like, "What would you do in this situation?" They're gonna add value and come up with something. Um, I love the kind of question of what would the innovative thinkers like a Steve Jobs, how would he handle this situation? And again, in Warren Berger's book, he has so many great questions for all different situations just to help everybody step outside the box, step outside their thinking and really think on their thinking. Don't just go with the flow of approaching situations the way we always have, but really pull back and go, okay, how could we think about this differently? Because I believe the quality of our questions determine the quality of our thinking, and the quality of our thinking really determines the quality of our outcomes. So if we spend a little bit more time assessing the questions that we're asking, ultimately we'll have better outcomes.
Elizabeth, I think that's a great spot to end us. Like, ultimately, like, that determines so much is how are you framing up what your customer experience looks like? What are the questions that you're asking to challenge the status quo on a regular basis inside your organization? So that's a great spot to end us. Elizabeth, where can people find you? Where can people follow along your journey, get your resources, bring you in? Give us some details on how people can get in touch.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I have a website. It's elizabethdicksonspeaks.com. And then LinkedIn and Instagram, which are, LinkedIn backslash Elizabeth Dixon Speaks. And Instagram is at, you guessed it, Elizabeth Dixon Speaks. So those are three great places to find me. And then on Amazon for the book is a great resource. And then there's a bunch of resources on my website too.
Love it. And for everybody listening, we will put all of those links in the show notes. So that way it's a one-click easy thing that you can go get Elizabeth's book. You can follow her on the socials and get in touch with her that way. So, Elizabeth, thanks again so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
To everybody listening, we'll see you next time.
Hey guys, before you head out, just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That helps more of your peers find the show as they search for ways to get better in their own roles. But this podcast is just a small part of what we do at Engagement. In our normal day in the office, we're crazy focused on helping athletic departments and sports and entertainment companies generate more revenue by becoming more customer-centric. To see how we might be able to help your organization, visit engagementpartners.com to learn more. Download a free guide, check out our blogs and case studies, or schedule a call with us if you want to see how we can help with your particular objectives. Our goal is to help you create deeper connections with fans and generate more revenue. So when you're with us, hopefully you find a nugget or two that helps your cause.